The rain fell in relentless sheets, drumming against the pavement with a rhythm that matched the frantic beat of Emma's heart. Neon lights flickered and reflected off the wet sidewalks, casting distorted shadows across the hospital entrance. The cold night air bit through her coat, seeping into her bones, but she barely noticed. She was 8 months pregnant, her body heavy and sore, and every step toward the hospital had felt like a monumental effort. Her breaths came in shallow gasps, and with each contraction she gripped her swollen belly tightly, praying she could make it inside. She had called Mason dozens of times. Each ring on her phone was a tiny stab of hope, quickly crushed by silence. No response. She sent messages, pleading, desperate for him to answer, for even a single word of reassurance, but there was nothing. Her texts remained unread, the ominous double ticks mocking her desperation. It had been hours of waiting, her mind spinning with fear and disbelief. How could he, someone she loved and trusted, abandon her in the most vulnerable moment of her life? By the time she was wheeled into the busy maternity ward, contractions had taken over, leaving her gasping and shivering. The staff bustled around her, polite but distracted, and Emma felt invisible, swallowed by the chaos of the hospital. Hours later, the pain of labor peaked and a tiny cry pierced the air, a sound that should have been comforting, but in that moment, it was a reminder of how utterly alone she was. The newborn's small body pressed against her chest, warm and fragile, yet there was no familiar hand to hold hers, no voice whispering reassurances, no familiar presence to share this life-changing moment. Harper, a kind nurse with gentle eyes, offered a weak smile and a blanket, but the hospital was overcrowded, the staff overworked. "I'm sorry, Emma, there's only so much I can do," she said softly, her voice sympathetic but limited by circumstance. Emma nodded, too exhausted to respond, the tears streaking down her face unnoticed. She rocked the tiny bundle in her arms, each sob from the baby echoing her own heartbreak. The rain outside pounded harder, and the neon lights cast harsh reflections on her tear-streaked face. She sank onto a cold bench, clutching her newborn as if holding on tightly enough could keep the world from crumbling around her. Fear, pain, and despair weighed down on her in waves, leaving her trembling, uncertain, and painfully aware that in this moment she was completely alone, abandoned by the one person she had trusted most. Before the night of abandonment, Emma had believed in a love that felt perfect, even if it was far from simple. She remembered the early days with Mason, luxurious dinners under crystal chandeliers, weekend getaways in sleek private jets, and gifts so extravagant they made her blush and laugh in disbelief. He had promised her the world, whispered words of forever while holding her hand, and painted a life of elegance and security that seemed like a dream she had never dared imagine. At first, it had been intoxicating, the kind of romance that swept her off her feet and made her feel adored, cherished, and unstoppable. But as the months passed, subtle cracks began to show. Mason's attention was fleeting. Work calls interrupted dinner dates, lavish parties pulled him away for nights at a time, and his social status seemed to matter more than her presence. Emma felt it in small ways, text messages that went unanswered for hours, promises he would keep that never materialized, kisses that felt distracted rather than sincere. She told herself it was stress, the demands of his life, but deep inside, a quiet unease began to grow. Then came the message, accidental, revealing, a glimpse into a world she wasn't meant to see. A text from Rachel, Mason's secret mistress, appeared on his phone. She didn't see it at first, but the way Mason hastily hid the screen, the flicker of guilt in his eyes, and the tension that followed spoke louder than any words. Emma's stomach twisted, a cold realization settling in that the man she had trusted completely had divided his heart elsewhere. Conflicting emotions tore at her. Love battling betrayal, hope warring with fear. Could the life they had planned ever exist if his loyalty was so fragile? Each luxurious memory now felt tainted, a bitter reminder of promises broken and trust betrayed. Mason's arrogance became glaring, his focus on status and indulgence highlighting Emma's vulnerability in ways she hadn't understood before. The foundation of their relationship, once so dazzling and solid in her eyes, now felt shaky, and Emma couldn't ignore the gnawing truth that her future, and that of her child, hung in uncertain balance. Emma sat on the cold hospital bench, her newborn nestled tightly against her chest, rocking gently to soothe the tiny cries that echoed in the empty corridor. Her body ached from the labor, muscles sore, and her back stiff from hours of sitting in an uncomfortable position, but the exhaustion was nothing compared to the weight pressing on her heart. She was alone, truly alone, with no familiar hand to hold, no comforting voice to whisper that everything would be all right. Every passing minute felt heavier than the last, and each blink of the neon lights outside seemed to mock her vulnerability. Harper, the kind nurse with a soft voice and sympathetic eyes, appeared occasionally, offering small comforts. A warm blanket, a plate of food, a gentle smile, but there was only so much she could do. Emma accepted the gestures gratefully but felt a pang of despair each time Harper had to leave, her limited presence a reminder of the support she lacked. Then there was Ryan, a passerby who had noticed her sitting forlornly on the bench. He offered practical advice, a temporary place to sit, even a word of encouragement. His kindness warmed her frayed nerves, but it also made the contrast to Mason's absence sting all the more sharply. As Emma fed her newborn and wiped away tears she tried to hide, her mind wandered to self-reflection. How had she ended up here, abandoned when she needed support the most? She had trusted Mason, poured her heart into their relationship, believed in the life they were supposed to build together. Now every promise felt hollow, every memory tainted by neglect. She questioned her self-worth, wondering if she had somehow failed, if she had done something to deserve this loneliness. Each thought was a tangle of confusion, fear, and sorrow. Adding to her stress, a hospital security guard approached, his tone polite but firm. "Ma'am, you can't stay here long. Please move to a waiting area or leave the corridor." Emma's stomach twisted with frustration. Where else could she go? The world outside was drenched in rain, streets empty, and she had nowhere to take her newborn. The guard's insistence, though understandable, magnified her sense of isolation, making the hospital feel less like a sanctuary and more like a prison. And yet, beneath the exhaustion and fear, a flicker of anticipation ignited. Something was about to happen, an event that would shatter the despair for better or worse. Emma's senses sharpened, her mind subconsciously preparing for a change, even as the storm outside raged and the neon lights reflected off the wet pavement. She clutched her newborn closer, heart pounding, unaware that her life was on the verge of a dramatic shift. The steady rhythm of raindrops on the pavement was suddenly interrupted by the low hum of a powerful engine. Emma's eyes flicked toward the street, her exhaustion momentarily replaced by curiosity. A sleek black limo glided to a stop under the hospital's flickering neon lights, its glossy surface reflecting the rain in jagged patterns. The car door opened and out stepped Mason, his designer coat drenched, hair plastered to his forehead, an expression taut with tension. The familiar confidence in his stride was tempered by an unusual hesitation, a conflicted air that Emma had rarely seen before. Emma froze, her heartbeat accelerating as disbelief washed over her. Why now? Why tonight, after hours of neglect, after she had struggled alone through labor and the first terrifying moments of motherhood? She clutched her newborn tighter, the tiny warmth against her chest grounding her, even as the shock threatened to paralyze her. The city lights reflected off the wet pavement, bouncing against the sleek black vehicle and catching Mason's furrowed brows, highlighting the inner turmoil in his eyes. Rain dripped from the edges of his coat, landing in puddles that shimmered under the neon glow, as if the storm itself mirrored the chaos of the moment. Emma's mind raced. Was he here to apologize, to beg for forgiveness, or was this some calculated attempt to regain control? The uncertainty made her stomach twist, a mixture of fear, anger, and cautious hope intertwining. Every step he took closer made her pulse quicken, and yet a protective instinct surged stronger. The baby in her arms seemed impossibly fragile, a symbol of the trust and love she had placed in the man before her. Mason finally stopped a few feet away, water dripping from his coat onto the slick ground. His gaze met hers, and in that instant, countless unspoken questions hung between them. Why had he abandoned her? What had changed? Could anything undo the hours of fear and isolation she had endured? Emma's grip on her newborn tightened as she silently braced herself for the encounter, her heart torn between the yearning to hear his voice and the cautious wariness that told her not to trust his presence. The storm around them seemed to grow louder, each raindrop punctuating the tension in the air, as if the world itself waited with bated breath to see what would happen next. Emma's hands shook slightly as she tightened her grip on her newborn, the baby's warmth a small comfort against the storm raging both outside and inside her heart. Mason stood just a few feet away, rain dripping from his coat, eyes searching hers with a mixture of guilt and calculated charm. Emma's voice cracked, trembling with anger and disbelief, yet carried a firmness that surprised even her. How could you just leave me like that, Mason? In the hospital, alone, after I gave birth? Her words hung in the air, heavy and raw, cutting through the hiss of rain and the distant sounds of the city. Mason took a hesitant step closer, running a hand through his wet hair. Emma. I didn't mean, His words faltered, the polished confidence she knew so well replaced by uncertainty. I was busy, overwhelmed with work, and look, I wanted to be here, He trailed off, a familiar mix of excuses spilling out, trying to soften the weight of his betrayal. His voice carried that practiced charm, the tone he had once used to make her laugh and melt in his arms, but now it felt hollow, ineffective against the raw pain she carried. Emma shook her head sharply, tears spilling down her cheeks, not from weakness but from the sheer intensity of her hurt. You didn't even try. You ignored my calls, my messages, and I was left here alone with our baby. Do you even realize what that feels like? Her words rang with accusation, each syllable echoing her heartbreak and fury. Mason's face tightened, a shadow of frustration crossing his features as he opened his mouth to speak again, but she held up a hand, cutting him off. I will not let you manipulate me with words or charm, Mason. Not now. Not ever. Her voice was calm now, quiet but resolute, carrying the strength of a mother protecting her child. The rain fell harder, splattering against the pavement and glistening under the city lights, creating a cinematic backdrop to the confrontation. Mason's desperation grew, his polished demeanor cracking as he realized the control he once had was slipping away. Emma lifted her chin, her gaze unwavering, eyes fixed on Mason, a quiet defiance emanating from every line of her body. She hugged her newborn closer, feeling the small life against her heart, a reminder of her own resilience. Mason stepped back, a frustrated sigh escaping him, his attempts to dominate the moment failing entirely. For the first time, Emma felt the power entirely in her hands, not in his words, his wealth, or his charm, but in her unwavering strength and the unshakable bond with her child. The days that followed were a blur of exhaustion, sleepless nights, and endless care for her newborn, but Emma's heart refused to find peace. She had thought Mason's abandonment was the worst of it, yet fate had more revelations waiting. While sorting through messages she had accidentally glimpsed on Mason's phone, a sudden text from Rachel appeared, unmistakable and damning. The words confirmed Emma's worst fears. Rachel had been involved with Mason while she had been carrying their child. A cold shock coursed through her body, and her hands trembled as the reality sank in. The betrayal wasn't just neglect, it was deliberate, calculated, and heartless. Anger flared inside her, raw and consuming. She paced the small apartment she had rented, clutching her newborn as though protecting them both from the storm of emotions raging inside. Heartbreak mingled with disbelief, and a bitter ache settled deep in her chest. How could someone she loved, someone she trusted completely, divide his heart so callously? Every memory of Mason's charming smile and whispered promises now felt like a cruel joke. The life she had imagined, the home she had dreamed of, now seemed like a fragile illusion, shattered by his arrogance and selfishness. In the midst of her despair, Ava arrived, bringing warmth and perspective that cut through the fog of betrayal. Emma, listen to me, Ava said softly but firmly, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. You are stronger than you realize. Mason's choices are his own. You don't need him. You have everything you need to protect yourself and your baby. You are enough. The words, simple but powerful, settled over Emma like a lifeline. She drew in a deep breath, feeling a spark of empowerment flicker amid the pain. Even as she began to feel a glimmer of strength, reminders of Mason's arrogance crept in. Kyle, his business associate, had stopped by unexpectedly, commenting casually on Mason's recent decisions, hinting at selfishness and entitlement. Emma listened quietly, realizing that Mason's charm and influence in the world were nothing compared to the life she was now determined to build on her own terms. The betrayal had cut deeply, but it had also awakened a new clarity. She would survive, thrive, and protect the small life she now held in her arms, without relying on the man who had once claimed to love her. After the shock of betrayal and abandonment, Emma knew she could no longer rely on anyone but herself. Determined to build a life for her newborn, she began taking practical steps, each one a small victory over fear and despair. The first move was finding a modest apartment, a space that was her own, no longer shadowed by Mason's presence or the echoes of past promises. It wasn't luxurious, but it was safe, warm, and hers. She arranged the nursery with tender care, placing soft blankets and small toys around the crib, creating a comforting environment for the child who had already become the center of her universe. Next came planning for the day-to-day realities of life as a single mother. Emma researched childcare, making calls to local providers, and organized a schedule that balanced feeding, nap times, and her own rest. She even began exploring work options, considering a small home-based business or part-time employment that would allow her to care for her newborn while gaining financial independence. Each decision, each step forward, strengthened her resolve and reinforced a sense of empowerment she hadn't realized she still possessed. Her confidence grew further with the arrival of Zoe, a cheerful and kind neighbor who noticed Emma struggling one rainy afternoon. Zoe brought meals, offered advice, and occasionally entertained the baby so Emma could rest, providing warmth and human connection that had been missing for so long. Through these small acts of kindness, Emma began to feel hope seep back into her life. She smiled again, first hesitantly, then more freely, discovering the joy in little victories, the baby laughing at a toy, the first homemade meal completed, a quiet moment of peace on her balcony as sunlight filtered through the window. Meanwhile, Mason's absence weighed heavily on him, though he struggled to admit it. Calls went unanswered, attempts to charm or guilt Emma fell flat, and he began to realize the power he once wielded over her was gone. His frustration mounted with each failed attempt to influence her choices or reassert control. The contrast between Emma's newfound confidence and Mason's desperation became painfully clear. With every passing day, Emma felt stronger, more capable, and more grounded in her identity as a mother and an independent woman. She no longer defined herself through Mason's presence or approval but through her love for her newborn and the resilience she had discovered within herself. Each small smile, each accomplished task, became proof that she could thrive despite the betrayal, and that her future, though uncertain, was hers to shape on her own terms. The rain fell steadily, a rhythmic drum against the pavement, as Mason approached Emma's small apartment building. His expensive coat was soaked, clinging to his broad frame, and his expression was a mixture of frustration, desperation, and faint hope. He had come intending to reconcile, to remind her of the past and perhaps regain the control he thought he still held. But as he stepped closer, the sight of Emma standing in the doorway, her newborn cradled carefully in her arms, made him pause. There was a new strength in her posture, a quiet confidence that unsettled him more than any argument ever could. Emma met his gaze steadily, the weight of her experiences reflected in her calm demeanor. "Mason," she said softly but firmly, "I don't know what you expected by coming here. Do you think you can undo the months of abandonment with words now? You've already made your choice and it isn't me." Her voice carried the authority of someone who had faced despair, heartbreak, and betrayal, yet emerged stronger. Each word was deliberate, a declaration that she was no longer vulnerable, no longer willing to allow him to dictate her life. Mason opened his mouth to speak, to plead or explain, but Emma raised a hand gently, stopping him before he could begin. "No, Mason. I'm done listening to excuses. I will not let you manipulate me or make me doubt my worth. I am building a life for my child and myself, and you are no longer a part of that life." Her words struck him like a cold gust of wind, cutting through the arrogance he had relied on for so long. The city lights reflected off the rain-soaked streets, glimmering like fractured pieces of their past together. Each droplet seemed to heighten the tension, emphasizing the distance between the two of them, not just physically but emotionally. Mason's frustration grew with every passing moment as he realized the truth. The power he once held over Emma was gone. Finally, he exhaled sharply and stepped back, the weight of defeat in his posture. Without another word, he turned and walked into the rain, leaving Emma standing in the doorway, her baby safe in her arms. She watched him disappear into the city night, feeling an unexpected lightness. The storm around them mirrored the turmoil that had passed, and as it began to ease, Emma felt the first real sense of freedom she had experienced in months. She was empowered, ready to embrace the new life she had fought so hard to claim. Months passed, and Emma's life gradually transformed from chaos and heartbreak into a rhythm of strength, stability, and quiet joy. She had created a home that was safe, warm, and filled with laughter, the kind of place where her newborn could grow without fear, surrounded by love and care. The apartment, though modest, had become a sanctuary, each corner infused with her careful attention. Soft blankets folded neatly, a small shelf filled with storybooks, and tiny toys scattered playfully across the nursery floor. Every detail reminded her of the life she had built, independent and self-reliant, far removed from the shadows of Mason's abandonment. The days were filled with small victories, moments that stitched together a life of resilience and love. She watched her baby laugh for the first time at a colorful rattle, felt the warmth of tiny hands gripping hers during feeding, and savored the quiet satisfaction of accomplishing daily tasks she had once taken for granted. Emma balanced her time carefully, working on a small home-based business that allowed her to care for her child while slowly building financial independence. Ava stopped by frequently, bringing advice, encouragement, and laughter that eased the tension of solitary days. Zoe, her neighbor, continued to be a comforting presence, offering meals or simply an empathetic ear, adding warmth to the household that made it feel complete. Though her heart was focused on rebuilding, Emma began to notice small sparks of connection with someone new, a kind, supportive figure who respected her independence and shared moments of laughter with both her and her baby. It wasn't the center of her life, but it was a gentle reminder that love could exist without compromise or betrayal, that happiness could be reclaimed on her terms. Meanwhile, Mason was left to grapple with the consequences of his arrogance and selfishness. No grand revenge, no dramatic confrontations, only the quiet realization that the woman he had tried to control had flourished without him. Every attempt to manipulate or charm her was met with indifference or polite refusal, and he slowly understood that his absence had been the catalyst for her growth. Emma's life had changed not because Mason returned, but because she had reclaimed her own power. She smiled down at her newborn, cradling the small life that had become her greatest source of strength and pride. The baby cooed softly and Emma laughed quietly, a sound filled with relief, empowerment and hope. She was confident, free and entirely in charge of her future, knowing that the storms of the past had only made her stronger. Emma stepped out into the morning light, the first rays of sun filtering gently through the trees lining her quiet street. The chill of the early hour brushed against her cheeks, but it felt invigorating rather than harsh, a symbol of the fresh start she had fought so hard to claim. Her newborn rested peacefully in her arms, tiny fingers curling around hers, a living reminder of the strength, love and responsibility that now defined her life. Every step she took felt deliberate, grounded, and free from the shadows of the past that had once loomed so heavily over her. The journey that had brought her here had been anything but easy. Abandonment by Mason had shattered the sense of security she once held, leaving her vulnerable and questioning her worth. She had spent nights rocking her newborn through exhaustion and despair, navigating the cold corridors of hospitals, and confronting the cruel realization that the person she trusted most had placed his desires above her and their child. Yet from that darkness, Emma had emerged resilient, discovering a depth of courage she had never known she possessed. Each challenge she faced, from sleepless nights to the emotional weight of betrayal, had been a lesson in self-reliance, inner strength, and the unwavering bond between mother and child. As she walked, she reflected on the countless small victories that had stitched together this new life. The apartment she had made into a home, the support of friends like Ava, and the warmth of neighbors like Zoe had all contributed to a sense of belonging and security. Even minor challenges had been transformed into opportunities for growth, and Emma recognized that her power did not come from wealth, status, or the approval of anyone else. It came from within. The love she carried for her child, and the determination to provide a safe and nurturing life, had become the foundation of her independence. Mason's absence no longer cast a shadow over her existence. His mistakes were his alone, and she no longer wasted energy on bitterness or revenge. Instead, she embraced clarity, gratitude, and hope, walking forward with confidence and purpose. The city around her shimmered in the early sunlight, each reflection on the pavement a reminder of the life she had rebuilt, brick by brick, on her own terms. Emma smiled down at her baby, inhaling the soft scent of new life and feeling the warmth of possibility in every heartbeat. This was not just survival, it was triumph. She had faced betrayal, heartbreak, and fear, and yet she had emerged whole, empowered, and free. The moral of her journey was simple yet profound. True strength comes from within, and no act of betrayal, no matter how cruel, can define the life of someone courageous enough to rise above it.